Last night on Fox News, a fiery clash erupted as Karoline Leavitt, the young White House press secretary, faced Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett in a confrontation that shook the studio. Sparks flew as Barrett called Trump a disaster and Leavitt a puppet, but Leavitt fired back, her voice sharp and unyielding, setting the stage for a brutal showdown. The Fox News studio buzzed with tension as the cameras rolled, the audience hushed, and the host, Sean Hannity, leaned forward in his chair. Karoline Leavitt, at just 27, stood poised at the podium, her blonde hair catching the studio lights, her eyes locked on Amy Coney Barrett. The Supreme Court justice, known for her calm demeanor, sat with her hands folded, but her expression was steely, a storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. Hannity introduced the segment with a smirk, promising a debate that would set the record straight on the state of American politics. The crowd, a mix of MAGA hats and skeptical moderates, murmured in anticipation. Leavitt, the youngest press secretary in history, had been appointed by Trump in 2020, a move that had stunned the political world. Barrett, a Trump appointee herself, was a conservative icon, her Catholic faith and judicial restraint defining her public image. Yet tonight, they were not allies, but adversaries, each representing a different vision of the conservative movement. Hannity wasted no time, diving into the heart of the conflict. Justice Barrett, you've recently called President Trump's leadership a disaster for the country. Care to elaborate? Barrett didn't hesitate. Her voice, measured but cutting, filled the studio. Donald Trump's tenure has left a legacy of chaos. His policies, his rhetoric, they've divided us. And Ms. Leavitt, as his press secretary, you're nothing more than a mouthpiece, a puppet for a man who's lost his grip on what America needs. The crowd gasped, some cheering, others booing. Leavitt's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Hannity turned to her, his eyes gleaming. Karoline, your response? Leavitt stepped closer to the microphone, her voice steady but laced with defiance. Justice Barrett, with all due respect, I wouldn't be standing here if President Trump hadn't seen something in me, a 23-year-old nobody back in 2020. He gave me a voice, and I use it for the American people, not just him. The MAGA supporters roared, waving signs that read, Karoline 2028. Leavitt pressed on, her tone sharpening. But let's talk loyalty. You sit on the Supreme Court because of Trump, yet you vote against his priorities at every turn. Who's the one abandoning their principles here? The studio erupted. The crowd split down the middle. Barrett's eyes narrowed, her composure cracking just enough to reveal a flash of anger. Hannity, sensing blood in the water, pivoted to Barrett. Justice, she's calling you out. What's your answer? Barrett leaned forward, her voice colder now. Ms. Leavitt, I serve the Constitution, not a man. My votes reflect my duty to the law, not to a president who demands blind allegiance. You'd do well to learn the difference. The jab landed hard, and the audience murmured, some nodding in approval. Leavitt's face flushed, but she didn't. Back down. The Constitution, Justice, or your own agenda? Your Catholic faith is no secret, yet you've dodged questions on the death penalty, a stance that confuses even your supporters. How can we trust your judgment when you pick and choose your principles? The crowd gasped again, louder this time. Barrett's faith was sacred ground, and Leavitt had just crossed a line. The studio lights seemed to burn hotter as the two women stared each other down. Hannity, barely containing his excitement, fanned the flames. Karoline, you're questioning a Supreme Court justice's faith? That's bold. Justice Barrett, how do you respond? Barrett's voice trembled, with controlled fury. My faith is between me and God, Ms. Leavitt. You're young, but that's no excuse for cheap shots. You're out of your depth. The crowd was on its feet now, some chanting Leavitt's name, others shouting in defense of Barrett. Leavitt, undeterred, leaned into the microphone, her voice rising. Cheap shots? I'm speaking for millions, who want answers, Justice. You call me a puppet, but I'm not the one hiding behind a robe. The studio shook with noise, Hannity struggling to regain control. As the segment neared its close, the tension was palpable. Leavitt had drawn first blood, but Barrett was far from defeated. The crowd was electric, divided, and hungry for more. Hannity grinned, knowing the ratings would soar. "We're just getting started, folks," he said, his voice booming. "Karoline, you've got the floor. What's next?" Leavitt's eyes burned with determination, her next words poised to escalate the fight to a new level. The Fox News studio pulsed with raw energy, the crowd's roars still echoing from Karoline Leavitt's bold strike against Amy Coney Barrett. Sean Hannity's voice cut through the chaos, handing the floor to Leavitt, whose fiery gaze signaled she was ready to double down. The young press secretary gripped the podium, her voice slicing through the noise like a blade. "Justice Barrett, you claim to serve the Constitution, but your rulings tell a different story. You've sided with liberals on key cases, diluting the conservative values you were appointed to uphold. The American people deserve to know. Are you still one of us, or are you playing both sides?" The accusation hung heavy, the crowd erupting in a mix of cheers and jeers. MAGA supporters waved their signs while others hissed, loyal to Barrett's judicial stature. Barrett's face tightened, her calm facade cracking further. She adjusted her glasses, her voice low but venomous. "Ms. Leavitt, you're treading dangerous ground. My rulings reflect the law, not a political checklist. You're young, ambitious, but throwing red meat to your base won't mask your inexperience. You're here to spin, not to govern." The jab was precise, aimed at Leavitt's youth and her role as Trump's mouthpiece. The audience gasped, some clapping for Barrett's counterpunch. Hannity, eyes gleaming, jumped in. "Karoline, she's calling you a lightweight. What's your comeback?" Leavitt's lips curled into a defiant smile, undeterred. "Inexperience? I've faced the press corps daily, answering for a president under siege from every angle. I don't hide behind a bench, Justice. I'm in the trenches, fighting for the people who elected Trump. Can you say the same?" The MAGA crowd roared, their approval shaking the studio. Leavitt pressed her advantage, her voice rising. "And let's talk about those rulings. You struck down parts of Trump's immigration policies the American people supported. Whose side are you on? Justice? The elites, or the heartland?" The crowd's energy surged, split between those chanting, "Karoline," and others murmuring in defense of Barrett's independence. Barrett leaned forward, her voice steady but laced with fury. "I don't answer to crowds, Ms. Leavitt, or to presidents. My job is to interpret the law, not to pander. You speak of the heartland, but you're selling them a fantasy, wrapped in Trump's brand. That's not leadership, it's performance." The studio buzzed, the audience divided. Barrett's words carried weight, her judicial authority a stark contrast to Leavitt's fiery populism. Hannity, sensing the escalating drama, turned to Leavitt. "Karoline, she's accusing you of peddling fantasies. How do you respond?" Leavitt's eyes flashed, her voice cutting through the tension. "Performance? Justice? I speak for millions who feel ignored by Washington, by elites like you who lecture from ivory towers. My faith, my values, they're with the people, not a system that's forgotten them. You call it a fantasy, I call it reality." The crowd exploded, MAGA supporters on their feet, chanting her name. Leavitt's Christian faith, a cornerstone of her identity, resonated with the base, and she wielded it like a weapon. "And speaking of values, Justice, your Catholic faith is admired, but your silence on the death penalty raises questions. You've avoided clear answers. Why? Are you ashamed of your beliefs, or just afraid to take a stand?" The studio fell, silent for a split second, the weight of Leavitt's challenge sinking in. Barrett's faith, like Leavitt's, was deeply personal, and the attack struck a nerve. Barrett's composure wavered, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "You dare lecture me on faith? My beliefs guide me, but they don't dictate my rulings. You're using religion as a prop, Ms. Leavitt, and it's beneath you." The crowd murmured, some nodding at Barrett's restraint, others restless for more confrontation. Hannity, barely containing his excitement, leaned in. "Justice, she's not backing down. What's your next move?" Barrett's eyes locked. On Leavitt, her voice icy. "My move? To remind Ms. Leavitt that governing isn't a reality show. You're playing to cameras, not building a nation." The jab was sharp, and the audience buzzed, sensing the fight was far from over. As the segment drew to a close, the studio was a powder keg. Leavitt had landed blows, but Barrett's gravitas held firm. The crowd was frenzied, split between the young firebrand and the seasoned Justice. Hannity grinned, his voice booming. "This is history in the making, folks. Karoline, you're up. What's your next shot?" Leavitt's gaze was unrelenting, her next words poised to push the confrontation to a breaking point. The Fox News studio crackled with raw hostility, the air thick with the fallout of Karoline Leavitt's relentless attacks and Amy Coney Barrett's steely rebuttals. The crowd, a volatile mix of MAGA loyalists and Barrett defenders, hung on every word, their cheers and jeers fueling the chaos. Sean Hannity, his grin wide, handed the stage back to Leavitt, whose unyielding stare burned into Barrett. "Karoline, you're up," he said, his voice a spark to the powder keg. Leavitt stepped forward, her voice sharp and deliberate. "Justice Barrett, you say governing isn't a reality show, but you're the one dodging the spotlight. The American people want clarity, not excuses. You've built a career on principle, yet you've wavered on issues like religious liberty. Why should we trust you to defend our values when you seem so comfortable compromising?" The accusation was a grenade, and the studio exploded, MAGA supporters roaring while others gasped at Leavitt's audacity. Barrett's eyes flashed, her composure fraying at the edges. She gripped the edge of her chair, her voice low but searing. "Ms. Leavitt, you're twisting my record to fit your narrative. I've defended religious liberty consistently, but I don't bend the law to appease a mob. You're not seeking truth. You're chasing applause." The crowd split, some chanting "Amy," while others waved Leavitt's name on signs. Barrett's words carried the weight of her judicial authority, but Leavitt's populist fire was gaining ground. Hannity, relishing the escalation, turned to Leavitt. "Karoline, she's accusing you of pandering. What's your response?" Leavitt's face was a mask of defiance, her voice rising with conviction. "Pandering? I'm giving voice to the forgotten, Justice, the people your rulings often ignore. You talk about the law, but what about justice? Your votes have weakened protections for the unborn, a cause you claim to champion. How do you sleep at night knowing you've let down those who believed in you?" The studio shook with noise, the MAGA crowd on its feet, their cheers deafening. Leavitt's invocation of abortion, a cornerstone issue for conservatives, was a calculated strike, and Barrett's face paled, her lips pressing into a thin line. The attack was personal, cutting into Barrett's public image as a pro-life stalwart. Hannity, barely able to contain himself, pivoted to Barrett. "Justice, that's a serious charge. How do you answer?" Barrett leaned forward, her voice trembling with controlled rage. "Ms. Leavitt, you're weaponizing a sacred issue for political points. My rulings respect the Constitution's limits, not my personal beliefs. You're young, but that's no excuse for distorting my work to inflame your base." The crowd buzzed, some nodding at Barrett's restraint, others restless for Leavitt's next move. Barrett's defense was principled, but Leavitt's emotional appeal was resonating, the studio tilting in her favor. Leavitt seized the moment, her voice booming. "Distorting? Justice? The people see through your deflections. You were Trump's picked a fight for conservative values, but you've cozied up to the establishment. I'm a Christian like you, but I don't hide my faith to avoid tough questions. Why do you? The crowd gasped, the mention of faith reigniting the earlier firestorm. Leavitt's shared Christianity with Barrett was a double-edged sword, and she wielded it to question Barrett's authenticity. The MAGA supporters chanted her name, their energy overwhelming the studio. Barrett's hands clenched, her voice icy. My faith is not a performance, Ms. Leavitt. You're using it to score points, and it's disgraceful. You're not here to debate. You're here to destroy. The studio was a cauldron of tension, the audience feeding off the raw confrontation. Hannity, his eyes alight, leaned in. Karoline, she's calling you destructive. What's your next move? Leavitt's gaze never wavered, her voice cutting through the chaos. Destructive? I'm exposing the truth, Justice. You've lost the trust of the people who put you on that bench, and I'm not done proving it. The crowd erupted, split between those cheering Leavitt's boldness and those stunned by her relentless assault. Barrett's face was a mask of fury, her next words poised to strike back with equal force. As the segment neared its end, the studio was on the brink of anarchy. Leavitt's aggressive tactics had the crowd in a frenzy, but Barrett's gravitas still commanded respect. Hannity's voice boomed over the noise. We're not done yet, folks. Justice Barrett, it's your turn. What's your counter? Barrett's eyes locked on Leavitt, her next move ready to tip the scales in this brutal showdown. The Fox News studio was a crucible of chaos, the crowd's fevered chants and jeers drowning out all but the sharpest voices. Karoline Leavitt's relentless barrage had ignited the MAGA faithful, but Amy Coney Barrett's unyielding presence held the line. Sean Hannity's call for Barrett's counterattack silenced the room, every eye on the Supreme Court justice. Barrett rose from her chair, her posture rigid, her voice a blade of ice. Ms. Leavitt, you've built your case on distortion and spectacle. You accuse me of betraying values, but you're the one twisting faith and law into a circus for your followers. I serve the Constitution, not your narrative. You want trust? Earn it through substance, not by tearing down those who've served longer than you've been alive. The crowd split, some cheering Barrett's gravitas, others booing her rebuke. Leavitt's eyes narrowed, her fists clenching at the podium. Hannity, his voice a spark in the tinderbox, turned to Leavitt. Karoline, she's calling you a showman with no substance. What's your answer? Leavitt stepped forward, her voice fierce and unapologetic. Substance? Justice, I've faced the world's toughest reporters daily defending a president you've undermined. I don't need a robe to prove my worth. You say I'm tearing you down? I'm holding you accountable, something your allies in Washington avoid. The people want fighters, not fence-sitters. The MAGA crowd roared, their signs waving like battle flags. Leavitt's youth and ferocity were a stark contrast to Barrett's measured authority, and the studio felt the shift. Barrett's face hardened, her voice cutting through the noise. Accountability? You're a mouthpiece for a man who thrives on division. My rulings don't bend to populism, Ms. Leavitt. They protect the nation's foundation. You'd rather burn it down than build it up. The accusation was a gut punch, and the crowd buzzed, some nodding at Barrett's principle, others chanting Leavitt's name. Hannity, sensing the stakes rising, leaned in. Justice, she's not backing down. Karoline, what's your next shot? Leavitt's smile was razor-sharp, her voice booming. Burn it down? I'm rebuilding trust in a system you've let drift. Your Catholic faith, Justice, it's a beacon for millions, yet you've dodged hard questions on life issues. Why? Are you afraid your principles won't hold up under scrutiny? The studio gasped. Leavitt's return to faith a daring escalation. Barrett's faith was her armor, and Leavitt was hammering at its seams. Barrett's eyes blazed, her voice trembling with fury. You keep dragging my faith into this, Ms. Leavitt, and it's a low blow. My beliefs guide me, but I don't wield them as a weapon like you do. You're not here to debate. You're here to grandstand. The crowd was electric, divided between Barrett's restraint and Leavitt's aggression. Hannity, barely containing his glee, pivoted to Leavitt. "Karoline, she's accusing you of cheap tactics. What's your response?" Leavitt leaned into the microphone, her voice a mix of defiance and conviction. "Cheap? I'm speaking for the heartland, Justice, for people who feel betrayed by elites like you. Trump gave me this platform and I use it to fight, not to hide. You call it grandstanding. I call it courage." The MAGA supporters erupted, their cheers shaking the studio. Leavitt's appeal to the base was a masterstroke, her Christian identity, amplifying her message. Barrett, visibly shaken, fired back. "Courage? You're riding Trump's coattails, Ms. Leavitt, not forging your own path. My court serves the law, not a personality cult. You're selling a brand, not a vision." The jab was sharp, and the crowd murmured, some swayed by Barrett's clarity. Leavitt's face flushed, but she didn't waver. "A brand? I'm fighting for a movement, Justice, one you've abandoned. The people see it, and they're done with your excuses." The studio was a battlefield, the crowd feeding off the raw hostility. Hannity, his eyes alight, pushed forward. "Karoline, you've got the momentum. Justice, can you turn this around?" As the segment neared its close, the tension was unbearable. Leavitt's populist fire had the crowd in a frenzy, but Barrett's principled stand held firm. The studio was a powder keg, ready to explode. Hannity's voice boomed. "Justice Barrett, one last chance. What's your final play?" Barrett's gaze was unrelenting, her next words poised to strike a blow that could shift the entire debate. The Fox News studio was a cauldron of raw emotion. The crowd's roars and jeers a deafening backdrop to the climactic moment. Karoline Leavitt's fiery populism had electrified the MAGA base, but Amy Coney Barrett's resolute dignity commanded respect. Sean Hannity's voice thundered, giving Barrett the final stage, her eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on Leavitt. "Ms. Leavitt, you've painted me as a traitor to the cause, but your attacks are built on sand. I serve the Constitution, a document bigger than any man, including your president. You thrive on division, but I build on principle. The American people deserve better than your sound bites. They deserve truth." The crowd split, some cheering Barrett's gravitas, others chanting Leavitt's name. The justice's words were a clarion call, but Leavitt's momentum was a tidal wave. Hannity, eyes gleaming, turned to Leavitt. "Karoline, she's throwing down the gauntlet. Your final response?" Leavitt stepped forward, her voice a blend of defiance and conviction. "Truth? Justice, the truth is the people feel abandoned by elites like you. I'm not here to play nice. I'm here to fight for them. You hide behind the Constitution, but I stand with the heartland, with the millions who want a voice, not a lecture." The MAGA crowd erupted, their cheers shaking the studio. Leavitt's Christian faith shone through, her words resonating with those who saw her as their champion. "And let's not forget, Justice, your faith is your shield, but you've dodged the tough questions. I'm a Christian too, and I don't shy away from the fight." "Why do you?" The studio gasped. Leavitt's final jab at Barrett's Catholicism, a daring move. Barrett's face was a mask of fury, her voice trembling but resolute. "You weaponize faith for applause, Ms. Leavitt. My beliefs guide me, but I don't exploit them for cameras. You're not fighting for the people. You're fighting for yourself." The crowd buzzed, some swayed by Barrett's restraint, others restless for Leavitt's fire. Hannity, sensing the endgame, pushed forward. "Justice, Karoline's got the crowd. Can you reclaim this?" Barrett leaned forward, her voice steady. "I don't need a crowd, Sean. I have the law, and it outlasts any mob." The jab was sharp, but Leavitt was ready. "The law? The people make the law, Justice, and they're with me. You've lost them, and you know it." The MAGA supporters roared, their energy overwhelming. The studio was a battlefield, the tension suffocating. Hannity, barely containing his excitement, turned to the audience. "Folks, this is history. Karoline, one last word?" Leavitt's eyes blazed, her voice soaring. "I'm here for the forgotten, the faithful, the fighters. Trump gave me this stage, and I'll use it to win back America, with or without you, Justice." The crowd exploded, MAGA signs waving like a sea of red. Barrett, her composure cracking, stood abruptly. "I'm done with this circus," she snapped, her voice cutting through the noise. "You want to fight, Ms. Leavitt? Take it to the ballot box, not a sound stage." With that, Barrett stormed off, her heels clicking as she exited, leaving the studio in stunned silence. The crowd erupted again, Leavitt's supporters chanting her name as Hannity struggled to regain control. "Well, folks, there you have it," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Leavitt stood tall, her smile triumphant, the MAGA base crowning her their new hero. The cameras panned to the empty chair where Barrett had sat, a symbol of her retreat. Leavitt raised a hand, quieting the crowd, her voice calm but victorious. "This isn't about me. It's about you, the people. We're taking our country back, one fight at a time." The audience cheered, their applause a thunderous wave. As the show ended, the studio lights dimmed, but Leavitt's star was rising. Social media lit up, her name trending as a conservative icon, while Barrett's departure fueled scrutiny of her resolve. Trump's tweet, "Karoline is the future, proud of her," sealed her victory, marking a shift in the political tide. The showdown had ended, not with a whimper, but with a roar. Leavitt's triumph a testament to the power of youth, faith, and unrelenting fight.